Welcome to Follow to Lead, where we discover how to listen for and follow God's call so that we might lead others to God. Our shared stories of inspiration from religious leaders and those active in the educational ministry of the church can help you know better how God is calling you and the role passionate Catholic education plays in spreading His message of faith, hope, and love. Now please welcome the hosts of Follow to Lead, Father Randy Sly and Kyle Pietrantonio.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Christ, the teacher, teach us to listen. Teach us to do the deep listening to the sounds of our soul, waiting to hear your voice, calling us to cast out deeper, to become fishers of men and women, shepherds of souls, to follow your will in order to lead others to the truth, beauty, and goodness only you can offer. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Welcome to Follow to Lead, a twice-a-month journey into the world of Catholic education, exploring what it means to follow God in order to lead others to Him. I'm Kyle Pietrantonio, your co-host.
And I'm Father Randy Sly. And today we will be talking with the Most Reverend Thomas Daly, the Bishop of the Diocese of Spokane. And Bishop Daly was ordained a priest in 1987. And in addition to parish ministry, he also served for several years as a teacher and later as president of Marin Catholic High School. He was ordained to the episcopacy in 2011 as auxiliary bishop for the Diocese of San Jose and installed as bishop for the Diocese of Spokane in 2015. For the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, he currently is serving as the chairman for the Committee on Catholic Education. And he also serves on the Committee of Evangelization and Catechesis, the Subcommittee on Catholic Home Missions of the Committee for National Collections, the Subcommittee for Native American Affairs of the Committee on Cultural Diversity in the Church, and as a consultant on the Committee on Religious Liberty. Well, Bishop Daly, obviously you're a very busy bishop, and so we are very thankful for you giving us this time today. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a great joy. I mean, I actually spent almost 20 years of my priesthood at Marin Catholic. Most of this as teacher, the last 8 years as the president, and it was there when we invited Archbishop Niederauer at the time, and I invited the Ann Arbor Dominicans, who accepted, and then I was named auxiliary and sent. In fact, one of the first members of the community, Sister Miriam, I believe, went on to be on the faculty of the high school you are at one
That's
time.
correct. Yeah. We love having our Dominican sisters.
Mm-hmm. Great blessing. Yeah.
Bishop, we're so glad you could be with us today. The Follow to Lead podcast is especially geared toward Catholic educational leaders and faculty and staff in our schools. And we're excited to learn that this past fall you were elected as chair of the USCCB's Committee on Catholic Education. Before we get into that and your role, I'd love to hear a little bit about your own upbringing and your experience in Catholic education as a student and a practitioner.
Sure. As I said earlier before we began the show, I grew up in San Francisco. So I often talk about there's two San Franciscos. There was Catholic San Francisco, and then there became crazy San Francisco. But I attended Our Lady of the Visitation School. I'm one of 7. My mom's identical twin had 6 kids, and they lived 2 blocks away. So we were at one time all serving Mass, the boys at Visitation, attending Our Lady of the Visitation School. And then my family moved when I began high school to St. Brendan's, where my younger 3 siblings attended. I went to Sacred Heart, which is the De La Salle Christian Brothers School, and then to USF, and then St. Patrick's Seminary. But looking back, my parents are both graduates of Catholic schools in San Francisco. And it's every day when I pray for they're both deceased, the sacrifices they made. My dad was an executive. He had a good job, but 7 kids in tuition, even in the 60s and 70s and 80s, because there's a great spread between my oldest sister and my youngest sister. But it's an education that truly formed me. And one of the things I brought to those years of teaching Marin Catholic which was a diocesan priest school, Dominican sisters, as I mentioned, are there now. They had the holy names. But I brought the approach to education that I learned, especially both the Daughters of Charity and the Christian Mothers. It's that French school of spirituality, places great emphasis on humility. Everything is a gift. They are privileged to play a part in it. But unlike certain other religious orders who take credit for any success you ever had, they taught us that, I would say, a humility, a recognition of God's gift. And that whole notion of let us remember that we're in the holy presence of God was very much characterized my upbringing, my education, my approach as president of the school, and that final line, live Jesus in our hearts forever. So I would say I was blessed that during the time of the 70s of upheaval in the church, there was great stability in these two religious orders. And if you contrasted my life with, let's say, someone who grew up in another diocese, another part with crazy religious orders going through identity crises, you could have someone the same age have a terrible experience of Catholic education. So coming into Marin Catholic, from my experience, and in a school that had many problems, especially in Catholic identity, I have found that if a Catholic school is off its mission, it does more harm than good. And because people have this mistaken notion of what it means to be a community of faith. And we're seeing, I think today, this parallel church developing. What does it mean to be a devout Catholic? That shouldn't be defined by a segment of the hierarchy and elected officials. So I would say that solid foundation from my family first, that was ratified and articulated in my education, helped shape me and help my vocation to be a priest and certainly as a bishop.
Great. That idea of a parallel church is one I think would be worth exploring if we have time a bit later, sure. Bishop. Sure. I referenced earlier your election this past fall as committee chair for Catholic education for the USCCB. I'd like for our listeners to get some insight, Bishop, into the process by which a committee chair gets elected. Do you submit your educational philosophy to your fellow bishops? Share a little bit about that process for us.
That's a very good question. I received a call in the summer from Archbishop Broglio, who happens to be in leadership in the bishops' conference. And he, as I did they both seemed to get calls coming to me in an airport. And I received a call from Archbishop Vigneron when he had that position, would I consider running for evangelization, which I did and I lost, which I think was providential because Bishop Cousins has far more experience. But then I received a call from Archbishop Broglio and he said, you've been nominated, do you accept? So someone put my name forth, and I said, okay, well, that's an area where I spent 19 of the 24 years of my priesthood. And it seemed, I was sent to graduate studies in education at Boston College. So it seemed to me something I was very knowledgeable about. So I accepted it, and I had been on the committee. Bishop Mike Barber from Oakland had asked me to serve on that committee. So I had experience on that committee, but as a member. So then it goes to, I guess they called individuals, bishops, and it was narrowed down to myself and the Archbishop of Atlanta. So of course, if you read, depending upon what the press is, there was some controversy. I'll be honest with you, it was as if I was the Ayatollah, that somehow I was coming into this position. Well, because we were virtual both in the summer meeting and then November, it was all done on paper ballots. So it's usually done anonymously on a click, electronic. So then they were reading it, and I was sitting in a rectory, actually in East Coast, participating in it, and I won. And so then, congratulations came in, and not to be controversial, but that same reporter for another newspaper called my election the most egregious. Now, I'm Tom Daly from Spokane. Not many people know of me. It's a small diocese, but in any case, I was elected. So it's a process where you're nominated, you choose to accept it or not, and then they narrow it down, and then you go, you're elected. So there's no campaigning. I wasn't working the phones for New England or the Upper Peninsula or anything, but that's how it happens. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, and in Bishop, you've come into this role as chair during a really tough time. The National Catholic Education Association recently published that we have now a 6.4% drop in the last academic year, the largest single decline in 50 years. Elementary schools seem to be the hardest hit. And as we look forward, you're facing a lot of challenges. What do you hope that the Committee on Catholic Education might be able to do to help reverse this momentum?
Sure. In reading the studies that talked about urban areas, I think that were the ones hit hardest, where the students would come from poor economic families, the families exactly who benefit Catholic education. And I'm hoping, in this time, as we see such chaos emerging in the public school system. I mean, Catholic schools are not founded because the public schools are bad. We're there to save souls with academic excellence. I often used to say at Marin Catholic, which would be a middle and upper middle class community, our goal is to get your sons and daughters into heaven, but we better get them into a good college before that. And I think the approach to Catholic education, we can't take our schools for granted. We can't take the fact that our young people are going to learn about Christ and learn the truths of the faith. And so during this time, I think we have to be clear in our mission. We have to make sure that our whole church sees that the schools are not just the responsibility of parents. They are the whole parish community. And especially in those communities, I'm thinking about maybe perhaps immigrant communities that are Catholic, that benefit greatly from the school, that we do all we can, because it is a time when young people are getting all of this, they're bombarded, their families, by views that are contrary to what we're talking about, the anthropology of Christianity and our church. So I'm hoping that I can play a part in navigating our Catholic schools through this difficult time where we see how important they are, and we call the whole Catholic community and communities that have benefited from Catholic education to see how important they are at a time when we cannot count on the secular world to support what we're about.
Bishop, during your years in ordained ministry, I'm guessing there's no doubt in your mind that these nearly 12 months now have been among the most unique and likely most challenging, from issues of racial tension to the global pandemic to a polarization of our nation politically. What has been your hardest challenge in your role as a shepherd, and in particular for the Catholic schools in your own diocese?
Sure. I'm fortunate that the director of our Catholic schools, Katie Rickers, and I work very closely together. And in fact, before just this our show right now, I met with her. We had to navigate, I think, a state of Washington that, essentially, like so much of the country, said that religion wasn't essential. But because our schools had the ability to adapt, and when this whole pandemic was unfolding, she was working on a plan. Now, we're not a large system. We're only 13 grade schools. And within that, there are four, now a fourth high school, one diocesan, one religious order, one lay board, and actually a Chesterton Academy that just was opening this fall. But during that time, she had a plan, and I thought it was a bit maybe unnecessary. I thought we didn't, but that plan was well organized. The principals were on board, and we moved quickly on it. We were able to open. Now, there was some reluctance in a couple of principals, a couple of pastors, but by and large, we were able to do that. So the pandemic, the challenge, of course, were the fundraisers that were all put on hold or virtual. And but it was important that we did have a drop in enrollment, but then we had other schools that could take people. So the challenge was those parents who wanted us to open completely, and then those small number of parents and a couple of administrators and priests who thought, no, it wasn't safe. So it was, what is the truth here? What was something we could do safely? And I think we were able to do it, but it had to do with a plan that was in place, and also a courage to move forward on it. Because as you mentioned, the isolation especially in the upper grades where they were the last to go in, we can't underestimate what that does. I mean, the church is a community. One of the great explanations, humanly, we can understand the mystery of the Trinity. It is one God in three persons. So there's always the notion of community, and Catholic education is about that. Discipleship, they were sent out 2 by 2. So discipleship means this community. And when that community was taken to place, I don't think we still know the extent of the hardship that this caused. But we were clear. We weren't bound by unions. We were bound by a mission that our children needed to be in school safely, and we were able to do it by and large.
One of the things that I've heard, Bishop, from many different places is that not only have there been some negative ramifications of going through this time, especially with the pandemic, but there's also been some good things that we're going to take forward from this point as we continue to educate. What's your perspective on that out there in your diocese?
I think we realize that a couple things, how schools and parents, families need to work together. And now suddenly when parents were forced into this role of being, academic dean, dean of students, athletic director, that was a lot to ask for our families. And I think it really taught us how valuable that time in a school is. I think it also really forced us to look at what is important in our life, especially the faith. And we're going to have to work very hard as the church, as shepherds, especially the priests, number one, to get people back to Mass, to see that there is a God there that loves them, but a God that needs to be worshiped. So I think what we took for granted, and if probably we didn't have the pandemic, it would have been like the tire with the slow leak. Suddenly, we woke up one morning when we really needed it, it was flat, versus the blowout, type of thing. And I think we're examining the value of schools, the place of God in our lives, the fragile nature of many times people's emotional state. And this, I think, has caused us to really be deliberate in what we are trying to do in guiding young people and their families to know Christ, not just know about Christ, but to know Christ. I don't think we have the one answer yet, but I think it's led to the discussion, what must we do? Because life is sacred. The whole racial divide in our country, the upheaval in the summertime, if we see ourselves as beloved sons and daughters of God, created in his image and likeness, that is to me the greatest example, witness, and reason for working together. And our schools can do this because we have a common philosophy, a common terminology, and we have most especially a mission, which is the salvation of souls.
Bishop Daly, could you share a little bit about your own vocational journey into religious life, and when you may have heard God first knocking, and how you've navigated that journey?
Sure. I was fortunate that I tell this story about, as I mentioned, when my older brother and my cousins and I were all altar boys in that time, and the summer would be, what are your vacation plans? And we'd always go, we want to tell the rectory, the scheduler, we're off the whole summer. We didn't want to have to get up in the morning and everything else. And my mom and my aunt would say, no, we go on vacation 1 week in June, 1 in August, you got to sign up. In those days, if you can imagine this, a weekday Mass in the summer, with just altar boys serving, 8 a.m. and 5 p.m., expected 2 servers at each Mass. And so one time I can remember going into 8th grade, priest who's still alive, he's retired, Father Mike Burns said, look, they're painting the church, Mass is moving to the convent chapel, the Daughters of Charity Convent, only one of you is needed. Now, keep in mind, we had always tried to get out of anything above and beyond. And for some reason, to this day, I don't know, I said, I'll serve. Well, I think that small yes going into 8th grade became the bigger yes, where eventually after college, when I graduated from college, I entered the seminary. So looking back, where did my vocation? It was nurtured in my family and by the example of the priests, in high school, the brothers and all that. But I think that small yes in that chapel allowed me to do that. I didn't reflect on that until I became vocation director in San Francisco Archdiocese. And I had that job for I think 9 years. And I sort of reflected on my story. So I entered the seminary after, I was going to be a lawyer. So I was pre-law in college, accepted to law school, but went on the seminary. First didn't like it, but eventually was ordained a deacon and spent a deacon year. And then I was sent across the Golden Gate Bridge in the Marin, had a great priest to be assigned with, then assigned to a high school. And that's kind of it. It wasn't anything dramatic. I didn't have a vision. But it was the example of my family. And actually, my mom never quite knew what priests did all day. She thought we played golf on Wednesdays, had mass on Sundays, but she knew what the Christian they taught. But and my family wasn't. It wasn't like Father was always on the pedestal. We had a great human understanding that they're not all the best people, but you keep your focus on Christ. And so that's kind of it. And then later on as a priesthood, I really have looked to St. Vincent de Paul and because Vincent de Paul underwent a conversion as a priest and becomes not only, of course, the great patron saint of charity, but most especially reforming of seminaries and a call to priesthood to lead as shepherds. And that's been a very strong part of my life. And then Lourdes, we are in the midst of our novena here in our diocese. Our cathedral is Our Lady of Lourdes. We're the only cathedral in the whole North America with Our Lady of Lourdes as our cathedral. And I've been blessed for the last summer I wasn't able to go, but 2006 was my first summer, and every year after that, of a youth pilgrimage, which I think has really brought, for me, a sense of the importance of Mary's intercession, especially for her church, and healing, and also leading us always to her son, Jesus. And I was able to have been leading youth vocation pilgrimages, which has been very beneficial for our church, because it's led to, I think, several young men who discovered the vocation are now priests.
That's wonderful. And one of the things I was thinking about when you mentioned the fact that the majority of your priesthood was really spent around Catholic education.
Mm-hmm.
And, those are the people that are a part of the Follow to Lead family, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And when you were in Catholic education, in particular, as a teacher, as president, do you remember what might be your biggest professional setback and how you made it through?
It's funny you bring that up. There was a great priest, Jim Tarantino, passed away, but he was the president of the high school, and he was asked to go into the high school to assist the lay principal in really kind of reclaiming the school. And it was extremely difficult. As I told one of the Dominican sisters who was experiencing a little bit of frustration, I said, I was there 19 years. And I said, I often reflected on Psalm 95. Of those 19 years, 14 were very difficult. Paraphrasing, for 14 years, I endured that generation. And I think that there were challenges there. There were, because you had a school that didn't think, that fidelity to the church was important. And it, we joked one day, not to a good year, to a good month. And let us pray that it didn't come down to the fact that we would say to a good day, because it took a lot of effort. And I'll be honest, the turning point was in the spring of my first year, the other priest's second year, when he said, we're going to have to pray some of these people out of here. And it began with a monthly rosary and holy hour. And our prayers were answered with a few personnel changes that first year. But it was extremely difficult because they might be good teachers, but there wasn't a good fit in a Catholic school. And that becomes so essential. We don't want people teaching in our schools who can't humbly witness to the gospel. And some of the best teachers weren't Catholic, but they had tremendous respect for the mission of the church. And I found that to be very affirming, but also we had some people, it just wasn't a good fit. And then in that time, it was providential, had to change principals, went through a couple of them, and a guy came back into administration who had been a teacher, tremendous man, Don Ritchie. And he just helped. He said, what do we want to do? And we did. There was a great team, and sadly he died of cancer after about 3 years. But the man who followed me, Tim Devoni, as a layman, is very good on the mission, and the principal there, Chris, and the sisters. But this, it wasn't easy. I have to say, it wasn't easy. In 19 years, that was the amount of time I was in. Most priests don't have 19 years, but it was prayer, perseverance, and focus on the mission.
Yeah, Catholic school teachers as witnesses, an absolute preeminent precept, Bishop Daly, for sure. What do you view as the greatest need our Catholic school teachers have today?
I would say support for those who are faithfully doing what they're doing, formation for those who maybe want to do their best but aren't sure, and then kind of the recognition that if you can't respect the mission of the church, you shouldn't be there. I think that's what fundamentally it is. And I have to be very honest. There are some people who I'm not sure why they're there. But the majority of teachers, I think, are trying their best. And I think there's a very strong need for lay witnesses. But I do believe there's still a tremendous need for priests and religious, those smaller numbers, to be there. And I think our young people are drawn to that. I remember when there was an interview with a student. I was already out of the school, but one of the young men said at Edinburgh Catholic, what we like about the sisters, their whole life is God and us. I mean, I thought there was great wisdom and insight of a young person at a time when so many messages come from our culture and society that are contrary to what Christ would like us to have.
It's interesting that during the pandemic, I'm sure that you've noticed, as did we at our high school, that the spotlight has been put on Catholic education because we seem to have rolled back into in-person learning quicker and done a lot of other things to kind of bring resilience to the school that a lot of families aren't finding in public education. And so we're getting a lot more interest from non-Catholics or for those that had seen public school as the normal route. If you had one thing that you wanted to say to someone who is considering Catholic education right now for their student, what would you say to them?
Sure. I would say that it is an investment that if the Catholic school is doing what it should be doing, the academics, the spirituality, the extracurricular, that it is an investment that you won't appreciate the depth of that investment, the benefit of it, until years later. There's immediate, but it is well worth it because there is so much working against the dignity of the person today. And so when parents think that, well, one of the sad things about the decline in Mass attendance is if you don't think it's important to be at Mass on a regular basis, you're not going to think it's important to make the sacrifice, financial sacrifice, for your children's Catholic education. But when you do that, it reinforces the home or fills in what the home may not be able to give. And there is a hope. Now, hope is different from optimism. Optimism is wishful thinking, often out of touch with what is. But hope is reality grounded in faith. And the reality is these are difficult times. But our faith tells us, again, Jesus' words before he ascended to heaven, know that I am with you to the end of the age. And that our people need hope. And Catholic schools produce that hope. They live and evidence that hope. And that's what we need. So to parents, I'd say, cut your vacation a week short. Do without this, because make the sacrifice for your Catholic education, because our young people are drawn to Christ. And there's one thing I learned. They may not always appreciate at the moment, especially high school students, what you're teaching them, but give them the truth and do it with charity, with love, with patience. And we're meant for that truth. And I love that line. It's not often prayed, the fourth Eucharistic prayer, all who seek you with a sincere heart and all those whose faith is known to you alone. Our goal is to help our young people seek with a sincere heart. And I believe they'll find Christ. And for parents, that's one of the greatest gifts you can give them.
Bishop Daly, I'd like to revisit that idea of this parallel church idea you brought up earlier. And if you could just tease that out for us.
Sure.
and some reflection on it. And is it a good thing for our church, or ought
No.
we to mitigate, and how? What's the remedy? We're feeling this tension in the schools as well, and would really welcome your thoughts on that.
Sure. I think this parallel church, what I'm seeing is all of a sudden there is this driven by certain religious orders or members of religious orders, even certain bishops, that fundamental aspects of our faith, especially the life issues, are somehow part of this generic package deal. The life issues, the unborn, the aged, the infirm, the refugee, they're connected, but the foundation is the unborn. And if you begin to allow elected officials who proclaim this great devout faith and yet advocate and push forth legislation agenda that puts at great risk the unborn especially, we have a problem. The elected officials do not define what it is to be a devout Catholic. And we are the teachers as bishops. And I think Archbishop Gomez's letter that was written by committee chairs also, that is the teaching authority of the church. And my question is, I was interviewed in a paper and I was quoting from what Cardinal George, who I thought to me was tremendous as a teacher and a man of humble wisdom, that we cannot be useful idiots of elected officials under this guise of this, well, this is what it means to be a Catholic today. Okay, well, it's like Herod at the time of Jesus. Herod was propped up by the Roman government, and he wasn't a true. And we have to be very careful for that. To ingratiate ourselves to certain elected officials, I don't. That's a dangerous path because it's not rooted in truth. And I think we have to stick with the truth. My experience in growing, again, as I said to someone, I didn't fall off a wheat truck. I came from an experience of seeing life in San Francisco change dramatically, and especially with the role of the church. And we have to be committed. And I use often, I think this is something that guided me as a teacher, the experience of Jesus with the rich young man, as we found in Mark's gospel, becomes for us, I believe, the pathway of navigating challenging issues in our society. We're told that Jesus loved him. Now, that meant his salvation was, Jesus wanted him to know that. He asked for the path to eternal life. He loved him. That is, he wanted what was best. Jesus respected his freedom. He did not force him to follow him, to sell. He didn't make him sell what he had. But the third thing is, which happens too often, Jesus did not compromise. He didn't run after him and say, forget what I said, just sell half of what you had. That's what I'm seeing here, a compromise. And that is a dangerous path because it's deceptive. And I think what we've seen in the church, I think, is a certain arrogance, humility, and education or intelligence lead to wisdom. Without that humility, which is truth, without that humility, we have arrogance. And it's almost that certain people are presuming to tell God what it really means. I find so much of this parallel church to be a portion of that book by C.S. Lewis, The Great Divorce, where there's the two clerics. One's an Episcopal bishop, Anglican bishop, and there's a priest. And they're talking about how they took courageous stands. And the young said to him, no, we didn't. We did that what was popular, that would sell books. And I think it's very dangerous for us to curry favors with certain elected officials and with friends in the church when it's not about Jesus Christ. So that parallel church is very dangerous. And I think it will only lead to further confusion, and it may risk people's salvation.
I think we're seeing that a lot of the students in the, especially in the secondary schools and the high schools, seem to be influenced a lot by that issue of the parallel church, and they're kind of voicing things that are kind of speaking toward that other that parallel church that exists, what kind of suggestions do you have for teachers to kind of keep everybody kind of moving toward the straight and narrow as far as church teaching?
Yeah, I think we're going to have to. I think we'll go back to Mark's gospel, where that interaction, Jesus and the rich young man. We, whether it's this whole issue of gender now, transgender, same-sex marriage, I think we are going to. We're teaching that which is quickly unpopular in our society, but we have an obligation, I believe, to our baptismal promises, our obligation to Christ and His truth, to proclaim this, not in a vitriolic way, but to say, no, this is what it is. I had a meeting last week, and I said, we have to remember, you're not forced to come to our schools. You choose to come to our schools. And why should we allow one family cause tremendous upheaval in a school because they're trying to say that this child is now identifying as a boy or a girl and whatever it is. And I think we have to be very careful. The whole situation of the school in the Midwest, the Jesuit school, as to what its identity was, and the archbishops trying to say, no, this is what you must do to be a Catholic school. So I don't think we can, my line I'm often quoting, compassion always, but compromise never. And we have to be very careful about that, I think. But I'm afraid what we're seeing is we will have one diocese or one school that is very so-called accommodating and welcoming. And then there will be across the river, the mean bishop who's trying to uphold church teaching and what we believe and teach. And the press, the secular press, and even certain Catholic press will make that individual out to be, evil and destructive. And let's stay with the truth. What is the truth? And I think that's important. I think we have to keep going back to the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Bishop Daly, with that case of the Jesuit high school in Indianapolis, which I think now is sitting in the Vatican, pending. I don't know if you have any insights on that case, or in your role as chair on Committee of Catholic Education, do you have a forum by which you can get involved in that case or share your opinions on that?
Yeah, I understand that they've appointed Cardinal Tobin of Newark to be a part of that. When we had our ad limina, which was the first week of February of last year, Region 12, which is the Northwest, when we had our meeting, we divided up who would present to the dicasteries. I presented to the dicastery in Catholic Education, and in that meeting, I led off by talking about the history of our Catholic schools in the United States, the challenges we faced. I then spoke about my own experience and the challenges, and I quoted from those 3 points of Jesus's interaction with the rich man in Mark's gospel. But I said it doesn't help when we have a situation of a school that is defying the bishop when I think the other school was run by a board, but was somewhat at one time part of the archdiocesan school system, followed church teaching, and this other one did not. And I think, we can't have certain schools exempt because they believe they have friends in high places. So I think, what are we about? I would argue that, and again, I don't have the authority as a chairman, that we have to be consistent. And if you don't want to be a Catholic school, then have the honesty to shut it down or reclaim it. My fear is the way we have we'll have people who say, good, I don't care. I just want my kid to go to a school and get into a good college. And that I think we have to work at. What does it mean to be a Catholic school? I was attending a meeting one time, and someone was talking about donors. And I couldn't believe one of the board members half our donors are pro-choice. It's just as matter of fact. And I thought to myself, well, suppose you just said half our donors are racist. Wouldn't that rattle everybody? Well, no, but it's just this kind of this notion that we're talking about life here. And I do believe we have to be very clear on that. I think it's what I was 12 years chaplain, weekend chaplain of St. Vincent's School for Boys, and it was founded for the orphans of the gold rush in the 1850s. Now they were wards of the court. But I remember a number of those, the director was a great guy, and he said, Father, most of these kids have been neglected, they've been abused, physically, emotionally, sexually abused. The ones who have been abused, they were almost hollow. That's the best way I could describe it. They were just hollow. And I thought, those words of Jesus, put a millstone around your neck if you're going to harm one of the little ones. And we have to do all we can for the dignity of the unborn, the mother, the father, and help families. And I think when we deviate from that, we're not doing God's work. And so I think when we teach, and Pope Francis has spoken a lot about this whole gender issue, the same-sex marriage thing, and we're being called to prophetically stand for that. I know it's not popular, but it's what we're called to do, and it's not just the clergy and the bishops. It has to be lay people, and I know it's a lot. It puts you probably at odds with certain circles of friends, but it just shows. I think we're now seeing what happened when the breakdown of Judeo-Christian values of our nation. I was listening to one talk when one of the professors was speaking about our country, in many ways, the Protestant roots, but we had a common belief in the Judeo-Christian view of life. And with the collapse in so much of mainline Protestantism, you basically have left evangelical Christians and Catholics trying to hold up this Judeo-Christian view. And it's difficult.
Mm-hmm. There's that phrase, the frog in the kettle, and kind of the sleepiness, I think, of a generation, especially for Catholic leaders in school settings. What's a way to wake people up in terms of the issues that we're facing right now? Because it seems like there's a complacency there.
I think that you're right. I think the pandemic was one thing that certainly woke us up. I think I often tell about cultural Catholicism. There's two forms. There's the ethnic cultural Catholicism, which I saw a lot in California, where people thought, well, they're always going to be in the church. Well, no, they're not going to always be in church. If you pray in this language and you live in this language, you have this kind of division. And people spend a lot more time in the world than they do in the religious world. So the ethnic Catholicism, you can't take belief in Christ for granted. We have a whole thing, I would say, about Catholic education, cultural Catholicism. If we send them to the schools, they'll learn about Jesus. They'll be part of their faith. They'll always go to Mass. No, they won't. I was meeting with a couple last month, and they were talking about, I guess, frustration, their kids leaving the faith. And they told me about the schools they had gone to. And I said, well, what are they leaving? What were they given? And I don't think we can take for granted that just because someone goes to one of our schools and they identify with that school, it's going to help them be a disciple of Jesus Christ. And that I think we're seeing. We're seeing, do people, just because, my grandfather went to this school and I went to this school and my dad went to this school. Okay, well, that's all well and good, but did it help you become a better Christian? To see part of a faith community and faith informing your actions. We're not just about social workers. That was always my fear. You have these kids in middle and upper middle class Catholic schools. They go on these mission trips. They dig latrines for a week. They go surfing for 2 weeks. And then they talk about how great it made them feel when they're on vacation in Hawaii. And it looked good on an application for college. Okay, the why behind what we do, and that's what Catholic schools, we have to be intentional. Why do we have these schools? I think the schools are as needed today as they were when we had to combat the know-nothings, because the know-nothings now are basically in media and they are in key positions, and it is a strong anti-Catholicism. And so you're right, the frog in the pot, hot water. I mean, we can't take the schools for granted. What does it mean to be a Catholic school? And it just doesn't mean it's an old school with a religious order tradition or a crucifix on the wall. How are we forming disciples?
And Bishop Daly, we don't know what this pandemic is going to do to mass going attendance once everyone is vaccinated and this next normal begins. And it's been my belief that our Catholic schools need to be ready to step into the breach even more. They are a locus not just for faculty and students, but our families and grandparents and alum. And so I'm curious of your thoughts on what the charge could be for our schools to help shoulder this journey and faith formation as part of a new evangelization for our church.
I think that's a great point. When parents choose to have their kids in Catholic schools, whether they're regular and mass attendance or not, they are making a commitment. And you have before you in a Catholic school a group of students who I believe in there is a grace that young people have to know about the Lord. I see that. I saw that from my own experience. There's just where young people are meant, they want to know the Lord. And because we already have them in front of us, we have to do all we can to make sure that they have experiences of prayer, of knowledge of the faith, the sacraments, that faith is put into action and caring for others and all of that. So we have this group of fours. What do we do with them? If we're not doing that intentionally, then we're just a private school, and we don't need private school. We will fail in that. And I think that is a mustard seed. And, I was telling a group of younger priests who were a bit discouraged, and I said, it could be worse. It could be after the French Revolution, where I never will forget the first time I went to France. I visited this room. It's called the Room of the Swords. I think it was part of a Carmelite seminary. There are these swords up against the wall where they had rounded up the priests in this room. The priests could look down on the yard, and every few days they'd take a couple of guys out and ask them to take the oath to the civil Constitution. If they didn't, they'd cut their head off. They come back, put the swords against the wall, blood-stained plaster, until the next group got to come. And I thought, okay, that's probably about as bad as it gets. So, there are never the best times for the church. Are there better times? Yes. Are these the better times? Probably not. But yet, that's what God has called us to. I think St. John Paul used to talk about, don't underestimate why in this moment of time, God's called you to this. So I think our Catholic schools are becoming a mustard seed where we have before us young people and by extension their families. And thus we cannot squander this opportunity. Society are sheep without a shepherd. And when Jesus looks out upon them, he wants us as their shepherds, as the bishop, as the priests, as the school leaders, to see the same. We should not and cannot squander this privileged opportunity to help them become disciples.
Bishop Daly, we're just about out of time. And again, just thinking of the listenership, the Catholic leaders in schools, teachers, staff, do you have any one thing you'd like to leave them with as just maybe kind of a final thought or marching orders or
Sure.
kind of a rallying cry that you'd want us maybe share?
I would say it begins always with prayer. There's this great quote of Vincent de Paul about grace is necessary to begin and even more so to persevere to the end. So we are a faith community, and I am with you to the end of the age, Jesus' word before he ascends to heaven. So I would say we begin with prayer and we end with prayer. We ask for our Blessed Mother's intercession. If we could take the wedding feast at Cana in Galilee, essentially fill in the blank what we're out of. They've run out of faith. They've run out of leaders. They've run out of hope. And we ask our Blessed Mother's intercession. We can't give up. Christ is with us. He's called us to this. And being a shepherd, as priest, as bishop, we have a flock to tend, and we have to care for them. And it's going to require sacrifice. So I would say, don't give up. Pray and ask for our Blessed Mother's intercession. And she'll lead us always closer to her Son, Jesus.
Those are great words to leave us with. And I think if prayer can be the bedrock of everything we do, we're going to be in a such stronger place as we continue to move on, and recognizing it's going to take some time. It's not an overnight miracle that we're looking for.
All right.
Well, Bishop, thank you again. And we do want to thank Bishop Thomas Daly of the Diocese of Spokane for being with us today. Bishop, what a joy to have you here and to hear your heart and to just really catch the fire that you have in you for Catholic education. And for our listeners or those watching on YouTube, if you haven't done already, please subscribe to our podcast and leave your comments that we might continue to grow and develop as we continue this journey together. We also want to thank our production interns, John Sampson and Alex Shire, along with our production supervisor, Mr. Jack Alsbach, for producing this podcast. And may God bless you.
We'd like to thank you for joining us on this episode of Follow to Lead, a production of the Duke and Altum Schools Collaborative. To learn more about finding your own path in your journey of faith, or for more information on what we discussed in today's episode, you are invited to follow us on social media and visit us on the web at diaschools.org. To provide a one-time donation or monthly pledge, please visit our website. Your gift will aid us in providing up-to-date information, additional resources, and other support on how to take Catholic education to a higher level. We look forward to helping you follow God's call to lead others to God right here on Follow to Lead.